Hello, good morning. This is the programme introduction for museum studies, and we offer a variety of different degrees in museum studies, the MSc, the PG Dip and the PG Cert, and I will be explaining the difference between all of those different programmes as we go through the conversation today. So Glasgow, we're really excited to see that you're interested in Glasgow and coming to Glasgow. I'm actually talking to you controversially from my living room in Edinburgh this morning. I'm not on campus, and we can talk a little bit about flexible working and flexible learning within this context. But our rival city, Glasgow, is where we are intellectually based. So Glasgow is a fantastic city to study museums within. It was named the top UK city for creativity and culture by the European Commission in 2019. It was the UK's first UNESCO City of Music, and it has more than 20 fantastic museums and galleries. And on the screen in front of you, we have a shot of Kelvin Grove, Kelvin Grove Art Gallery and Museum, to give it its full title, which is a museum run by the city, the Civic Museum, and it includes a fantastic collection of art and material culture, and it's a real privilege to be able to teach just across the road from it. It's also one of the world's most friendliest and affordable cities, and that's not us saying that, that's a Time Out survey, and Glaswegians are fantastic, they are helpful, they are lovely, they are kind, and they act in solidarity for others. So I'm really proud to be associated with Glasgow and to work in a Glasgow-based community. In terms of the university, some key facts and figures for you. So the university is very, very old. It was established in 1451, and it was ranked in the top 100 of the world's universities and named Times Higher Education University of the Year in 2021, which we were extremely proud about, especially to get that award during a pandemic. So fantastic place to work. It's a member of the Russell Group, which are research-intensive universities in the UK, and it's also a major employer in the city with more than 9,000 staff, including 3,400 research and teaching staff. So we contribute a lot to the city, and our civic mission is very much at the heart of what we do, and that is very relevant when we come to thinking about museums and public engagement. So we'll explore that a little bit this morning. Our student experience, of course, is at the heart of what we do, and we have 35,000 students from more than 140 countries, and I'll be finding out a little bit more about where all of you are based in a moment. We are ranked second in the Russell Group for teaching and student satisfaction in the National Student Survey from 2020, and we have over 250 student clubs and societies. And we offer study abroad opportunities in 180 destinations as a university. We have some very specific partnerships that we have in museum studies that I'll flag for you in a moment. So slightly less than 180 for museum studies. Museum Studies is based within the College of Arts, and we're here in University Gardens, is the image you can see behind us here, some lovely old stone tenement buildings. And the College of Arts is ranked 62nd in the world for the arts and humanities, and we have 10 specialist research centres, world-leading collections, and a thriving postgraduate community with over 800 PGT students. And museum studies make up quite a large chunk of that. We normally have between 50 and 60 museum studies students in a particular year, so quite a big chunk of the College of Arts is focused on museum studies and our related degrees as well, led by archaeology and history of art for those of you thinking of other programmes beyond the museum studies programme. So we are quite an unusual museum studies programme because we are based not in archaeology or history of art, we're based in an information studies department. Now, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the concept of information studies. It's quite a different one, I think, for any of you who've maybe come from a history or an archaeology background. But information studies is essentially interested in ideas of information management. We work a lot in terms of the digital humanities, and we've got a beautiful manuscript in the background here. One of my colleagues specialises in digital materiality, so thinking about how we work with digitised versions of beautiful historical manuscripts and what it means to encounter these objects in the digital environment. So really fascinating research, super relevant in a post-COVID society. And we have a strong interest in what we call the GLAM sector, which, for those of you not up on your acronyms, is galleries, libraries, archives and museums. So we run two programs in parallel, and both of them are accredited by SILIP, who are the Knowledge Professionals organisation, and they are the MSc in Museum Studies and the MSc in Information Management and Preservation. And just to explain a little bit more, those who do the Information Management and Preservation, or IMP program, as we like to call it, tend to go into archives and library studies. So we do a lot of co-teaching, a lot of co-opportunities, and even though you're thinking of applying for a museum studies program, we really want you to understand the connectivity between what you do in a museum and an archive and a library, and how these might be different, how they might be the same, the need for a commonality in terms of how we talk to one another and understand each other is something that we really, really emphasize in our programs. It's something that we debate and jostle with as staff as well. So having these kind of two programs running in parallel with one another is a real advantage, and it's something that I really enjoy teaching at Glasgow. So, museum studies at Glasgow then. We aim to enable students to develop a holistic understanding of the museum and wider cultural heritage sector, from practical skills development, which I'm sure is why a lot of you are here, to deep engagement with the theoretical and political issues surrounding museum work. And this is right at the core of what we do, the centrality of our mission, and particularly this idea of engaging with political issues has been so apparent in the last few years, particularly work in the museum sector related to Black Lives Matter and how we embed things like anti-racist practice within the museum sector and within our museum professionals, our emerging museum professionals, as we refer to you. So this is really at the core of what we do and what we're trying to do, and it's really important that we have it stated here in our aims. So one of the real privileges that we have here at Glasgow is the fantastic collections that we have to work with. And in the background here we have a shot of the Hunterian Art Gallery and various paintings behind them. So we really use the museum environments to teach and to think about museum practice. So the Hunterian was founded in 1807. And it's Scotland's oldest public museum. So it's quite a privilege to be here and working with them. And it's home to one of the largest collections outside of the national museums in Scotland. And it's a collection that's recognised as nationally significant. So it gets money from the Scottish Government to fund its work, as well as funding from the university. Its collections include the world's largest display of James McNeill Whistler and Charles Rennie Mackintosh. And it has around 1.5 million items, which is so many, relocated to a purpose-built designed study and storage centre at Kelvin Hall. And I'll tell you a little bit about Kelvin Hall momentarily. So let's explain a little bit more about the programme structure for museum studies. And this is one of the things that we always get a lot of student questions around, so I can take lots of time in the Q&A to really explore this with you. So for those of you thinking of doing the full degree, or for those of you thinking of doing only the taught part of the degree, the postgraduate diploma, this is our structure. So in semester one, you take 3 core courses which are designed to give you a grounding in museological theory and museological practice. So Introduction to Museology is a theoretical course. We look at some of the key debates in museums, starting in what we term the period of new museology. So from the 1980s onwards, where we really saw a shift in how museums were engaging with communities, engaging with society, and re-envisaging their role and what their key purpose was. So we kind of start with kind of some historiography around the museum, and then we look at key theoretical trends in terms of thinking about museums. So for example, we look at museums through the lens of identity. We look at memory, memorialization, memory practices. We look at the museum in terms of its post-colonial / colonial legacy, and we also look at things like the digital museum, which is an area that's a real specialism for us in information studies, as well as many other ideas relating to conceptualizations of visitors, ways of working, so co-production, working with communities, all these different sorts of things, and ideas of decolonizing museums, but also museum studies, are embedded into this course as well. So your theory, your intellectual underpinning of everything. We then offer 2 courses which are much more practical focused, and by practical I don't just mean that we pick up objects and we touch them and we move them around. That's sometimes what people think about when we talk about practice. We're thinking about developing the skills that you need as a museum professional, and those can involve things like being able to write reports, being able to interpret objects, being able to work together in groups. Group work is quite a fundamental aspect of what we do because museums rely on working with people, on collaboration. So museum skills and professional practice covers a range of different things. We introduce the idea of different sorts of careers that you can have in a museum and the different skills that you might need. We get people to reflect a little bit on their own entry into the sector, what skills they have already, where they see themselves going. We look at things like interpretation, theories of interpretation, how to engage audiences, accessibility, working in the digital environment, these sorts of skills. Managing and using collections is our specialist collections-based course, and we really draw upon our expertise across the GLAM sector in this course, thinking about how is what we do in museums, where we catalogue objects, record objects, try to engage the public with objects, different from, for example, libraries and archives. So that's the kind of starting point of the course. And within this course, we look at some of those practical skills related to understanding museum catalogues and catalogue records. We think about collection policies and whether or not we choose to collect an object and why, and the rationale behind that. We look at things like museum collections in the digital environment, so issues around copyright and reproduction and creative reuse of collections. And this is really where the sector is beginning to move to. So rather than we own all the stuff and it's ours, how our practices can facilitate the use of collections by a greater number of people. And again, this is so relevant to debates around decolonizing museum practice and really serving the communities for which we host collections. And we also talk about things like disposal and repatriation of objects as well. The second semester aims to consolidate a lot of these issues from the core courses. So all students have a choice between 2 courses, one of which is exhibition development, and I'll show you an example of that practice momentarily, and the other is a work placement. So these normally take place 1 day a week. At the moment it's Monday. That might not be the same for next year, but students on the exhibition development course undertake a talk course where they come in every week and they work with different people from the Hunterian Museum, myself, other members of the museum studies team, to think about how to develop an exhibition from its concept through to a final proposal for a physical exhibition. And those then all go forward to our team at the Hunterian, and one is chosen for a physical display within the Hunterian spaces, and the others are developed as online exhibitions. So it's a really fantastic course. We're in the middle of teaching it right now. The students are just getting to the end of where the proposals are. It's that kind of slightly, nervous, is it all going to come together? But they're doing a fab job. I'm really proud of them. So that's currently where we are in the teaching year. And our work placement, I know a lot of students have questions about the work placement, so we'll talk about that a little bit in the Q&A perhaps, but we have lots of placements based here in Glasgow, but increasingly we're really taking advantage of the blended nature of work, so we've got students doing placements in all kinds of different locations right now. The work placement involves 1 day a week during term time in semester 2, with 10 days of further placement during the Easter holidays. And we can talk about that a bit more because it's always something that people want to know more about. The remaining two options then are optional courses, and you can choose from those that we host ourselves in Information Studies or those within the College of Arts. We would encourage you to choose courses that are relevant to your museum studies programme. This isn't necessarily the time to go and be picking up a class in French or Gaelic for that matter, given that we're in Scotland, unless it's relevant to your career. So if you really want to work with Gaelic song collections that are held by the National Library of Scotland, a Gaelic course might be relevant, but normally we steer students towards courses, for example, run by archaeology or history of art, which tend to have an element of working with collections within them. The other option that we have, so rather than the diploma or the full master's, is what we call the postgraduate certificate. And this is something that I'm really pushing at the moment because it's a shorter course that gives you a sense of the museum sector without having to commit to a full degree. And I think it's a fantastic opportunity for those who maybe financially don't want to take on a full MSc, or maybe you're working at the moment and you don't have the time to kind of take lots and lots of time out for your studies, or you're not quite sure if museums are for you and you want to kind of get a little bit of a taster. And we've got our first student who's enrolled on the postgraduate certificate started this year with us, and she's a mature student and she's having a fantastic time. So I'm really pleased that this is working for her, and I'd really emphasize, if any of you are thinking about, oh, I'm not quite sure if I want to commit to a full master degree, this is the course for you. And you can see it includes a number of our core courses. The key focus here is that the postgraduate certificate focuses on the practical professional courses rather than the theoretical ones. So you have a choice of, well, it's not a choice actually, it's museum skills and professional practice and managing museum collections in semester 1. And in semester 2, you have a choice of exhibition development or the work placement or museum learning and engagement. So a slight difference from the full programme, but museum learning engagement has a project-based component to it and therefore fits within this kind of professional focused certificate model. I'll talk a little bit about the museum learning engagement output in a moment. So some of our example optional courses that are run within Information Studies: Power and Politics in the Post-Colonial Museum, which was a new offer in 2020 and is led by my colleague Dr. Rosie Spooner, who's an expert in museums and empire. We then have Museum Learning and Engagement, which is taught half as a taught course and half as a project-based learning. So we go out and do things and we implement them, and I convene that one at the moment and I love it. Digital Cultural Heritage, which is a real specialism within our department. We have a Professor of Digital Cultural Heritage, Maria Economou. My colleague, Professor Sarah Cook, is an expert in digital art practices. And our colleagues from libraries and archives really think about the digital element of these things. So different people contribute to that course, and it's a real core offering for information studies. We also offer a course in 2D digitisation, so the beautiful images of the manuscripts and things you saw earlier, being able to produce 2D images of paper-based materials, primarily archival materials, is the focus of that course. We then have 2 courses led by curators, hence the title Curating. So Curating the Sciences, which is led by Dr. Nikki Reeves, who's actually a curator at the Hunterian. And that's a fab course. He does lots and lots of work with objects in the class and then takes students out to different museums across Scotland with a science element. Also, a key feature of that course that maybe doesn't appear in the title is he really focuses on disability history as well and scientific relationship with disability. And it's a really, really fascinating area that students absolutely love. And our final optional course here is Curating Library Practices, and this is led by Professor Sarah Cook, who is both a professor and a curator and has recently not recently now actually, it's quite a long time ago, 2019 put on a big show at Somerset House in London called 24/7, thinking about the kind of 24/7 nature of our environment. And she's really interested in this idea of lively practices of curating and exhibiting work that maybe deteriorates or changes. It's not fixed in any way, so curating lively practices is her specialist option that she runs. It really explores this in a lot more depth. Beyond information studies, as I mentioned earlier, you have a choice of 2 courses within the College of Arts, and I would advise you to go and find out a little bit about what courses usually run, bearing in mind that it changes from year to year. And the way to do this is to look at our course catalogue, and it's not always apparent actually which schools are within the College of Arts, so I've put them for you here. You've got the School of Humanities, School of Critical Studies, and the School of Culture and Creative Arts. So those are the ones that sit within the College of Arts. And importantly, you're looking for a semester 2 course, not a semester 1 course, because your semester 1 is full with our core courses. So once you finish the talk programme, those of you who are undertaking the full MSc will then undertake a research project over summer, and we're just about to allocate our supervisors for that this summer. I've seen some of the proposals, they look fab, so I'm really looking forward to working with those. Last year I supervised a student who's working with Museums Galleries Scotland on understanding museums' response to representing empire. So she did this really amazing survey of all museums within Scotland, supported by Museums Galleries Scotland, and was finding out kind of what has changed in their practice, and then helping Museums Galleries Scotland come up with recommendations for how the sector should approach these issues. So it was an absolute privilege to supervise her, and I'm really looking forward to getting started on this year. So we offer 2 different kinds of research projects, and they are weighted at 60 credits, both of them. And the first is a dissertation. Now, many of you who've come through a UK system will have undertaken a dissertation, usually around 10,000 words at undergraduate level. At postgraduate level, we're talking 15,000 words is the length of this piece, and it is an independent research project, so led by you. And you propose it, and then we match you with a supervisor, and you go and undertake the research. Now, we also offer an applied dissertation, and the example I just gave you of the student working with Museums Galleries Scotland was one of our applied dissertations. Now, this one is slightly different. So normally these are projects that the student proposes because they are working with another organisation and they'd like to do a piece of research related to that organisation. So those who do the work placement in semester 2, for example, sometimes develop a research project while they're there with their placement supervisor, and then they go on to undertake some independent research for them, essentially, over the summer. So that's the kind of standard route through this. However, we also have some that are organisation-led, and we have organisations that we work with really well. So Museums Galleries Scotland is one of them, Glasgow Museums, Historic Environment Scotland, the National Trust, many others, who come to us each year saying, we'd love to do some research around this. We think it'd be really nice for a student. So they give an initial idea, this is kind of what we were thinking, and then students apply to those by creating their own research proposals, saying, you know, this is where I would take the topic, this is how I would do the research. So we're at the stage in the academic year right now where supervisors, the organisational supervisors, are reviewing those proposals and deciding whether or not they want to kind of go ahead with the student, or the student is saying, actually, I'm going to take it in my own direction and do some independent research myself without the organisation, so doing a traditional dissertation. So they might include a placement, they might include spending some time in the organisation, but it's not a work placement. It's really important to emphasise that. It is a research piece of work, but it can use things like practice-based methods. So undertaking something, staging an intervention, for example, and then reflecting on how that worked. So it's a little bit different from perhaps a desk-based project that some of you might have done at undergraduate. and a bit more thinking about how you would implement research in the sector. And this is a real strength of the programme because research is so important to the museum sector. So if you're a curator, you undertake curatorial research, obviously. If you work in audience development, you will be undertaking things like visitor surveys and focus groups and other sorts of interventions and thinking about your audiences. All kinds of research is embedded within the museum sector, so we really want to build these skills for you. So, how will you be taught? We have really embraced the blended approach to teaching, and we did this pre-pandemic because what we want is for your time on campus to be spent doing, okay? So either some kind of practical workshop or interacting with the students, talking with the students. We're really trying to move away from you're going to come to campus, have a lecture, not talk to anyone, go away. It's not appropriate for master's level teaching. It's really not appropriate for professional preparation, essentially. So we've really embraced what we call a blended approach to teaching, which means that we incorporate some online content with time on campus, essentially. So this is a master's level programme. It's a bit different perhaps than your undergraduate experience, and for those coming from some international contexts, it might be a bit different in terms of the amount of contact time that you're used to and you expect. But we combine formal teaching with self-directed study and group work. So currently both our exhibition development students and our museum learning engagement students are doing a lot of time outside of the time that I see them, where they work together and work through problems and come up with different things for their proposals, for example. So we will combine things with online lectures and activities. So sometimes those online lectures will be live, like this one, or pre-recorded if you're watching the recording. And sometimes they will be short recordings that we've made, or we will offer links to other content that we think is really valuable. And I think this is especially important when we're talking about diversifying the range of people that you hear from in this programme. So it's not just listening to white women talking about their views on museums. I think that's really important. So we'll combine that kind of digital content with things like on-campus seminars and workshops, and often those are based with museum professionals. And a lot of those museum professionals are our own, are based at the Hunterian. They're very heavily involved in our teaching, but we get in lots and lots of different speakers across the whole year, but particularly in the second semester on our specialist courses, you'll have different people that you're working with each week. So yeah, a combination of teaching, university staff and sector staff, which again I think is a real strength for the programme. And we'll also have things like self-led online activities, so workbooks, which is particularly useful when we think about understanding some of the collections management processes, for example. So we've got some workbooks that you work through online so you can try and understand and test your understanding a little bit more. And we'll also suggest that we think that you should go and visit certain museums and certain exhibitions in the working week, and then come back and talk to us in class as well. So we're not always with you, but we're giving you things to do to help structure your learning. So it is a very full week when you actually do all of these activities. When you see your timetable, it looks like maybe you're only doing stuff for 6 hours a week in terms of those campus times, but actually it's around 30 to 40 hours of study a week to complete all of these activities. And on that, if any of you are considering part-time study, I strongly recommend it if your funding allows, if you're self-funding in particular. It is quite an intense undertaking doing all of these different things, and I really, really recommend part-time study for particularly our local students in terms of being able to balance work and all of these different activities. And we've got loads of part-time students, and it's a great community that we've got here, so not an unusual thing to do at all. So I've mentioned this a little bit already, this idea of project-based learning and authentic assessment. So authentic assessment, we'll have a little quote which I'll read for accessibility points of view, is to perform real-world tasks that demonstrate meaningful application of essential knowledge and skills. So this is what we mean by authentic assessment. So during the course you'll be doing things like writing reports, writing proposals, interpretation panels, things like constructing facilities reports and object analysis and making your own catalogue records and things like that. So we do have a few essays and we do have a few presentations, the sorts of things that you might be familiar with from your undergraduate studies. But really we emphasise these professional-based assessments so that those of you who are planning on entering the museum sector, which is normally 90% of the cohort, have this experience. So we're not just giving you something, giving you a grade, and then you move on. We're really trying to develop your skills through the assessments that we use. So one example of project-based learning is the outputs from our exhibition development course. Now, this was actually the first physical exhibition that had come from this course. It's quite a new thing that students have been able to do this, so we're really grateful to our Hunterian colleagues for facilitating it. And this was an exhibition called PEATLANDS, which launched in summer and very much spoke to kind of ideas of changing habitat, of some of the issues around climate change that we were seeing, explored through the concept of peatlands and changing landscapes in Scotland. And this was such a well-received exhibition in the Hunterian that it actually was then moved to our Curating campus as well, which is our other Glasgow-based campus. So what was supposed to be just a short student exhibition has actually taken on a life of its own and is still travelling around the university campus. So I'm really proud of our students for doing this. So they had to do everything as part of this process. They had to come up with a concept. They had to think about who the visitors were going to be to the exhibition. They had to research their objects and their dimensions and any conservation requirements that they had. They had to think about whether the objects that they wanted were actually on display somewhere else and therefore we couldn't have them, and think about some of the internal movement processes related to that. They had to write the text, and they were engaged with thinking about the design process as well. And this was the final output. So we were really pleased, and I'm really looking forward to see what this year's students are coming up with. They're using the same physical space, thinking about connecting with Glasgow Science Festival and also Scotland's Year of Stories. So they're working towards those themes, and we'll see the final products or the proposals for the final projects in 2 weeks' time. And this is our other example of project-based learning. And again, this is one that I'm very excited about because for the first time, students are actually going to be delivering a learning and engagement project, which I'm very excited about, especially post-pandemic when we've not been able to get out and do stuff with visitors very much. So this is a shot of the inside of Kelvin Hall, which is our building which has representation from Glasgow museums, from the National Library of Scotland, from the Hunterian ourselves, and also from Glasgow Life. So weirdly, it has all these beautiful, wonderful museum objects and library objects. There's a little, I don't know if you can see it down the bottom, there's a little screenshot of some moving image from the National Library archives, just to give you a feel of like the different types of collections that we hold in this building. But as well as museum objects, there's also a gym. It's a very strange building, and the BBC film studios are actually moving into the building as well. So it's a really fantastic, wonderful building. For those of you who know Glasgow, it's the old Museum of Transport building. The Kelvin Hall is where the circus used to come to town. It's a fantastic site. And in the end of April, the students on Museum Learning and Engagement are going to be putting on a learning day, a learning intervention aimed at family audiences, where we look at all the different collections in the building and we try and get students, the students are going to facilitate doing different sorts of learning activities within that space. And it's all themed around Earth Day, which is part of our commitment and our partners, so the National Library, Hunterian and Glasgow Museum's commitment to climate action, basically. So the students are hosting this. And again, project-based learning, so I'm meeting them every week, finding out what they're doing, and then we talk about kind of ways to enhance this. So this is our collection showcase space of Kelvin Hall, And one of the proposals is that the students are going to take one of the loan boxes from Glasgow museums, which has lots of objects to do with nature, and they're going to have it in the space, as well as some tables of some craft activities aimed at getting the families who use the building for the soft play or the gym to actually think about using some of the collections and feeling that it's their space too, essentially. So looking forward to attending that at the end of April. So our other form of authentic learning is obviously our work placements. You can't get more authentic than being in the work placement. So again, this is something that students always want to know lots and lots about. Our placements change each year depending on what organisations are doing and their work programs and things like that. It's been slightly reduced during the pandemic because people haven't wanted to have students on campus. But that being said, I think we had 35 students taking the work placement this year, so we managed to get a very large number actually, so I was really proud that came together. So as I've mentioned before, we've had people working with Museums Gallery Scotland, the Hunterian Museum and Art Gallery, Glasgow Life, which is the umbrella organisation that contains all of the different civic museums in Glasgow, of which Kelvin Grove, that I showed you at the beginning, was an example. New Lanark World Heritage Site, and we've also had students taking remote placements with the Smithsonian, and there's funding available for those to be physical from next year. And we've got this year, for the first time, very exciting, we've got some students who are off to Barbados, all funded. One of them to do some curatorial research and one to do some audience development research as well. So those students haven't been told that yet, that they've been awarded those. So I'm excited to see their faces when they find out they're spending the summer in Barbados. I wish I was spending the summer in Barbados. Maybe I'll go and supervise their placements. So lots and lots of opportunities there, and many more as well. Like I say, it fluctuates, changes each year depending on what projects are going on, who gets in touch with us, things like that. So finally, who will teach you? I hope you've kind of picked this up from what I've been saying, but we combine working with our museum professionals and our staff in information studies, and you can find out more about our information studies staff research interests by looking at our website. Everyone has a profile and all of their publications, and importantly knowledge exchange projects as well that they've been involved in, which is much more relevant I think for this sector. So for example, lovely Professor Maria Konomu, who's down there in the red of this photo. She's a she works at the Hunterian, but she's also a professor in digital cultural heritage in information studies, and a lot of her work has been looking at digital interventions in museums. And one of her recent projects was the Emotive project, working with museums across Europe to think about how digital technology can be used to create empathetic visitor experiences, thinking particularly about the use of storytelling. So here she is in our Antonine Wall Roman section of the Hunterian Museum with one of our project partners from Iraq, and thinking about this is the end of a big sector event where they'd come over to do some knowledge exchange, thinking about different ways of interpreting this heritage. And up on the right we've got Malcolm Chapman, who's our head of collections management and contributes heavily to the Managing and Using Collections course, and this is a site of students essentially doing a workshop with Malcolm, and our staff at the Hunterian are really sector leading experts. Malcolm sits on various Scottish Government committees, so we're very, very grateful to have such experts working with us and invested in the teaching as well. They're invested in you as emerging museum professionals, and they want you to do well and they want you to get the skills that you need. So it's a real privilege working alongside them. Okay, that's is all I had to say for you, and I want to make sure that we have lots of time for Q&A. So I'm going to stop sharing, but not before I say that you can get in touch via email, but please email the humanities inbox, because they will be able to field a lot of your inquiries. I am heavily involved in lots of project-based learning at the moment, so I'm a little bit slow on my emails, but if you filter things through the humanities email address, if you have any questions after today, and anything that they can't answer, they then pass on to me. So thank you very much for listening. I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to stop